Welcome to me. It's so nice to have you here on this Expat Life. And I'm really happy that you decided to be my guest, one of my first guests, actually. And welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Great. You're calling in from Norway, where you're currently living with your
Yes.
husband and dog. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about how you got there? What is your story?
Um, yeah, that's an interesting question. So it was like January 2021, where my husband and I were taking a walk. We were still in Cape Town in South Africa, and he just said, by the end of next year, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to be living in a different country because for us, moving outside of South Africa was something that we wanted to do, but we weren't sure how we were going to do it. And so, when he said that in the beginning of 2021, we had no concrete plans. But as things sometimes happen, he got an opportunity to work in Oslo, in Norway. And so we jumped at it. It wasn't maybe the perfect time. I had just resigned from my job. I was about to start my own business. And so I thought, oh, well, I could probably make this business work wherever I am. And so, just exactly as he said, at the end of 2022, we were both living in Oslo. And so that's how we got here.
Wow, I find it so fascinating. So basically, you're telling the universe we want to live abroad and we will give each other, like, we'll give ourselves a year to accomplish that. And the universe delivers. And you got this
Exactly.
amazing opportunity. That is so
Yeah.
cool. So you've been living here for a few months now.
Yeah. So it's been about 7, 8 months. And I think that I timed it right because we kind of got here together in the summer. So when I arrived, I didn't have, all the scary stories that people say about how cold it is and how dark it is. I actually arrived at a very festive time. So when I got here in July, we had like sunshine until 9, 10 o'clock at night. And, it was warm and everybody was in the park and it was beautiful. And so that gave me a really great introduction into the city. And then gradually, as the temperatures dropped, then I could also time it with how I was acclimatizing to just being here. And
Hmm.
so, as much as I was like quite afraid of, oh, how am I going to cope with the cold? Because people say that a lot. They're like, oh my goodness, it's so cold. How will you cope?
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that I didn't land into that. We have a friend of ours who arrived here in I think it was November, and so that's hard if you come from a very sunny, very warm place to arrive into like the north
I can
in
imagine.
November. Exactly. So yeah, so that's how long I've been here, and it's been good for the most part. It's definitely been an eye opener, and I've learned a lot about myself and the kind of life I want to live. And I think that's been the greatest blessing of being here.
Can you share a little bit more about that? I'm really curious to hear what you learned about yourself.
Yeah, I think I learned that this expat life is a life that I want to live, because it gives me the freedom to be wherever I want to be. So I've always had this sense of adventure and I've always had this sense of, being elsewhere in the world. Not that I'm trying to run away from something or I want to, like completely immigrate out of South Africa. That's not the case at all. But it's to say that if there is this whole world and we can, in some way, live in different places and make a life for ourselves elsewhere and explore different parts of ourselves, then, I definitely wanted to do that. And so, what I've learned from being here is that is absolutely true. But the other thing that I've learned is this is not the place for me. And so, as much as I like a lot of things about being here, I'm starting to put pieces together of where is the right place for me, or at least what kind of place is a better fit. And so, I've started to think a bit more about what that place looks like. I think it's a place, well, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that it has more daylight hours, I think, that place. But the other thing is, I think that place is also a place that's had a long history of migration. And so it's very used to different cultures coming together and people from everywhere bringing little bits of themselves into
Mhm.
that new city. So I've been thinking about it as a port city, might be the kind of city that I would
Oh,
enjoy living
interesting.
in.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's something that I hadn't recognized. Like I was born and grew up in Johannesburg, which is, like an incredibly diverse city. People joke and say there's nobody who's really from Johannesburg. Everybody kind of gets there to do something. So
Mhm.
it's got this buzz of anything is possible and you can get here and you can make a life for yourself and you can make it big.
Yeah.
And then Cape Town, where we moved kind of shortly after we got married, and we lived there for about 7, 8 years. That is a port city, and so I had completely taken that for granted. And then coming to Oslo was like, oh, there's a
Yeah.
there's a Norwegian way, and it's not a bad way or a good way. It's just the thing that you need to do when you get here as quickly as possible if you want to integrate is actually assimilate and
Mm.
become Norwegian.
Mm.
And for me, that was like, okay, well, that means if I assimilate, that I have to give up who I am. And that's something that I don't think fits in with what I value in
Mhm.
the world anyway, people assimilating and giving up who they are. And so it's kind of been this long lesson, it's not so long, but it's been a lesson so far of just figuring that out. And so when I think about, okay, well, if I want an expat life and I want a city that maybe has more daylight hours and that has a history of migration. Where might I go?
Mhm.
And so far I'm thinking it might be Spain.
Oh, yeah. Good choice, I think.
It might be Portugal. I'm
Yeah.
going like further south.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some of the things that I've been learning about myself so
Yeah.
far. I think the other thing which has been challenging is I'm learning that as much as I really value experiences over things, I like nice things. It just is. Um, so, for instance, like our apartment here in Oslo is quite small. I call it the cocoon. Um, and so, as you can imagine, there isn't a lot of space to entertain and have people over and that kind of thing. And that's something that my husband and I, we used to do a lot and we enjoyed doing it when we lived in Cape Town. And so that's been really challenging for me to say that thing that was a part of my identity, I can't do that for a
Mm.
while, and maybe for as long as we live here. And so, as much as I'm okay with that intellectually, sometimes in my heart, it does feel
Yeah.
sore because I would love nothing more than on a Sunday afternoon to have people over and we have lunch and we laugh and we play board games or whatever the case may be. But that's not something that I can have yet.
Mhm.
And that's quite difficult, I think. Yeah.
I can imagine, yeah, if that's such a big part of your personality and identity and you can't really express yourself basically, that's really tough. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think we've, in a way, had to embrace the cultural things that you do here instead. And so, one of the things that I did to kind of bring friends together and also get outside in nature, because that's the Norwegian thing, is we actually just had a picnic outside at a beautiful lake. And it was in autumn already, so it's actually quite cold. But it was wonderful to kind of light a fire and to have friends around and to put some meat on the fire. That's a very South African thing to
Yeah.
have a braai.
Right, yes.
And so yeah, so that was something that we did. And that was something that I'd like to do more of. I think it brought back that feeling of, oh, okay, we can still gather people and we can bring them
Mhm.
together. And then it's also just, yeah, being open to doing other things that are maybe right for the culture where we are now, and then having that sense of connection with other people who you
Yeah.
bring along with you. So we've taken up hiking again. We used to do quite a bit of hiking in Cape Town, and so we're doing that again now. And the hope is that we'll bring friends along with us
Mm.
to do some of that stuff, so we still get that sense of connection.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because something that I talk to my coachees about, or in my online program, Expat Life School, is that sometimes we crave certain things, like, for example, the braai or being with friends. And we can't really do that because we live in a country where it's not really the norm, or, you're not close to your family if you miss them, whatever. Then I always ask them, what is the feeling that you always hope to gain with that activity, or with by doing that? And are there other ways to get that feeling in another way? And what you say is that, okay, we want to bring people together at our house, but actually it's about connection, and we can find connection also in
Yeah,
other ways. Yeah, by hiking or
yeah,
having an autumn picnic.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really nice.
exactly. It's exactly that. But I think the other layer on top of that that I would add is it's okay to feel that suck. I mean, it does suck.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think it also it's sad in a few ways because it also, yes, on one level, it's one layer of your identity that you give up. And then on the other hand as well, it's that, if you maybe were used to a particular kind of life, or you were used to like being in a particular kind of social class, maybe when you move as an expat, you have to give up some things.
Yes.
Like for us, one of the things we also had to give up was having a car. And so, as much
Mm-hmm.
as I've always had this vision of living in a walkable city where I don't need a car, it is really nice to have one if you want to
Yeah.
go on a road trip, or if you want to, go to IKEA and buy something. And so, again, if that's something that you value, it's like it does just suck that
Yeah.
then if you can't get to a place by public transport, you're not going
Yeah.
there, and
Yeah.
on some level it like clips those wings that I guess as an expat you want to have. But yeah, acknowledging that I guess that's just the way it is sometimes is also
Mm-hmm.
fine, because then there will be joys and memories that you make that you hadn't anticipated, if you hadn't given up those other things, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Again, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think accepting the situation for what it is also key in finding ourselves in a better place. Sometimes we can go over and over things that aren't working out for us, or that we feel sad of, or make us angry or something. And the moment that we can really accept, okay, this is the situation, and it's okay for me to miss those things. It's okay to feel sad about it. It's okay to be angry about it. Some weight falls off your shoulder, I think. So yeah, really happy that you're saying that. I think this is like the first step you need to take in order to be like feel better where you are.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I can also imagine for you, like, not having the car is maybe more difficult than the average expat, because sure, every expat wants to have that, freedom to go anywhere. But you mentioned in the beginning as well that freedom is so important to you, that you
yeah,
really, yeah. So I can really imagine that this is like a really visible thing where this is happening, that your value is not really, you
yeah.
cannot really express that value, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, I wonder what it will look like in the next chapters of the expat life that my husband and I want to live. It's not possible for us, I don't think, for us to get to that point here. But again, as you say, it's like, what is the thing that you actually want? If it's connection, if it's a sense of adventure,
Yes.
there's a lot of adventure that you can have. For instance, this past Saturday, we went up to one of the skiing spots, and we actually just did some hiking. And it was interesting when we got there. The bus stop is like literally right at the slope,
Mhm.
and then you can see people skiing. And so we kind of started our hiking trail, and some people were ice fishing. And actually, like for me, even seeing people just doing it and getting off the bus with their skis and whatever, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is not such a big deal. Like, maybe we could just sign up for a course and buy the equipment secondhand or whatever.
Yeah.
And we could also do this thing. And so then again, it's like that sense of adventure and that sense of exploration, it comes back, but it was
Yeah.
totally different to what I thought that it
Yeah,
would be.
exactly. Yeah. So this is what I love about Expat Life, because you get to learn so many new things about the world and about yourself. Because,
Yeah.
well, I've never skied before in my life, but I imagine if I would live in Norway, I would definitely give that a try and use the
Yes.
bus to get there, to get to the slope. So I find this is one of the nicest aspects for me about expat life, that you get to explore yourself and also the world a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's that saying something like you take yourself everywhere you go. So at some point I was thinking to myself that if I lived in a different country, I would be like magically different. And
Oh
what I'm
yeah.
finding actually is that I'm just me. I have my
Yes.
good days, I have my bad days. And so even that sense of exploration and adventure that I've always had, yes, I will express it doing different activities, but it's still just me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how that expression changes depending on where you are. Because, like, for instance, in December, we went to Spain for a little while. And again, it was exploration and adventure, but different as to our expat life in Oslo.
Yeah, exactly. I love also that what you said about you bring yourself wherever you go. This is so true. Like, I think I always love to see like a move abroad as this opportunity. I always say that it's this big blank canvas that is all yours to paint. And this is an addictive part of moving abroad for me, because every time I think like, oh, now I can start all over again. Um, but in the end, it is still you who you bring along, unless you're very
Yeah.
conscious about the choices that you make. But you can also do that at home. You don't need to live abroad for it or move abroad. Yeah. Can you maybe,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I was going to say about that. I don't know. I feel like, certainly for me at least, living in Cape Town, I think we got to a point where it was just regular. Like we had done the things, and actually the sense of adventure that I got was when the dynamic changed completely, where my husband left South Africa last year, March, and I was still waiting for my visa. And so I had like 4 months to wait. And so suddenly things had changed like completely, where I was now living all by myself in this city. And then again, there was like that exploration and adventure. But I think, had that drastic change not happened, I think we would have just gotten very comfortable. And then you kind of have your routine. And and then you're just
Yeah.
like living by routine. Or maybe I'm just an adrenaline junkie that's
No,
looking for the next thing.
well, I'm the same, I think. But I know I definitely agree. Like, it's so, I think 80% of the people are in their comfort zone and in a really
Yeah,
comfortable position, and they're so used to their own ways and to their limits as well. And sometimes they don't see what is still possible for them. And it
yeah,
helps to move abroad, because then, your whole world gets turned upside down. And this is really when new opportunities can arise, and this makes it easier for you to change certain things or to view the world differently. But if you're
exactly.
really
Yeah,
really determined, you can have this experience at home as well, but it just takes a lot
sure.
more awareness and effort, I think. But you
Yeah,
definitely touched
yeah.
upon one of the really nice parts of living abroad.
Yeah.
What are some of the other challenges that you experienced in, well, it's your first time living abroad as an expat. What is something else that you didn't expect maybe to be challenged by?
Um, so actually maybe first to take a step back is this is actually the second time I've lived as an expat, but the first time that I've lived as an expat as an adult,
Hmm.
and the first time I've lived as an expat in Europe.
Okay.
So the first time I lived as an expat, we were in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the States. I was helping my mom, who was doing her master's degree there. So that was interesting because I thought it would set me up really well for this experience. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in some ways it did, just like the shock of a new culture, a new way of doing things, that wasn't so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the challenges that I faced here that I think are unique is the language barrier. So, even though Oslo is an incredibly bilingual city, you do get locked out of some things if you don't speak Norwegian.
Mm.
And that's because I think language and culture are so closely mixed that you kind of need to speak the language. And so, as much as, I've been able to find events and a sense of community in places that are for internationals, there is a level at which you can tell that, like, there would be more of the city that was open to me, or even more of the country that was open to me
Hmm.
if I spoke Norwegian.
Yeah.
And so, that's a bit of a tough one because even if we stayed here for 2, 3, 4 years, the level of Norwegian we would need to get to
Yeah.
be able to have like casual social conversations wouldn't be at the level that really we would need. And so that's been a challenging thing. And also, I think I've also been very fortunate that I didn't have to get here and look for work because if you don't speak Norwegian, that is incredibly difficult to
Mm.
find work. Um, and so, those are some of the challenges around language. And then the other thing that I think was a challenge, or yeah, the other thing that is a challenge for me is there aren't very many people of color
Mm.
in Oslo and in Norway. And I mean, of course, I knew that coming here, but it does mean that I think the perception of who I am, even as an expat versus just being an immigrant or a foreigner, that there's a difference. Because I think
Yeah.
like the perception of who you are, if you present as a person of color, you're brown, you're black, what you are doing in Europe is you are there because you've escaped some sort of hardship in your
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
or maybe you were adopted as a child or something. But there's always this thing of, oh, a black or brown person living this expat life, like they're not really expats, they're foreigners.
Yeah.
And so that's been an interesting thing to navigate because I can see sometimes, like when I interact with people, that firstly they don't expect me to speak the way I do, which I know is also like an accent thing as well. The South African accent is a
Hmm.
strange one. But also, when I speak about the fact that I'm an entrepreneur or all the things that I've been able to do, there's almost like a double take because I think the perception is maybe I came here because I was fleeing a war, and there's nothing wrong with that. That
Hmm.
it's just that it has been interesting for me and it's been challenging for me to assert
Yeah.
myself and again to be solid in my identity, knowing who I am and what I bring to any group, to any, like volunteering situation or work situation. Um, and it's also been really interesting to see how I then also developed like my business here in Norway, because
Hmm.
then if you add those two elements like language and the perception of people of color as expats,
Yeah.
it then just becomes quite a tricky landscape to navigate. And so we'll see. I want to say like watch the space to see how it unfolds. But yeah, that's been surprisingly tricky.
Yeah. I can only imagine. When I lived in Brazil, I physically also stood out from the locals there, obviously, but always with a more positive connotation to it. And I also found that annoying because sometimes I just wanted to be invisible. I didn't want to be stared at or got asked if I was American or something. And I can only imagine if, I know how Europeans think and view immigrants in a way, like this is what they see. And this, yeah, I can only imagine how challenging that is, especially if you're also starting a business and don't speak the language sufficiently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So well done for you of like still standing there and still enjoying it.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the qualities that expats in Norway or expats in general, and also expats of color, need to still thrive in those situations, to still express their own identity, to feel grounded and really strong who they are?
Yeah. A few things just came to mind. The one is I think you need to know why you're there. And that needs to be something that you are very clear on and you come back to it almost as an affirmation, that you've got put up somewhere in your house that
Nice.
you come back to.
Yes.
In the professional world, there's this concept called a tour of duty, which was made famous by Reid Hoffman. And the idea is that if you have someone with high potential at work, to get them to keep engaged and to excel is you give them a tour of duty. So something that they will achieve in a particular amount of time. And then after that tour, you'll reassess what their next kind of tour of duty will be. And so if I apply that to expat living, I think just being very clear on what your tour of duty is when you get to the place is super important. So for my husband and I, when we got here, we said to ourselves, okay, we've got a 2-year tour. And what we want to do is we want to see if we like this place, and we also want to travel to other cities to see, firstly, what the rest of Europe is like, because we realize that there's so much that we still want to understand. And maybe in that we will find what our next chapter will look like. So that was very specific. So I would say the number one thing is that clarity is really important. The other thing that came to mind is get yourself a therapist back in your home country, which is something that I've kept. I've kept my therapist and I meet with her weekly. And it's been really great for her to be somebody who not only knows me, but also knows my context, because
Yeah.
she shares the same cultural context as I do.
Hmm.
And so it's really great for me to have that connection, somebody who can hear what I'm kind of dealing with and talking through that. And then, I guess the other skill is, yeah, I think you've just got to be really solid in who you are and what you're about, because that will get tested. That will be tested as you meet new people.
Yeah.
And you might start to feel like, oh, maybe I am somebody who goes dancing until 2 a.m., or maybe I am somebody who does that the next thing. And if you're not sure of who you are, I think even as you meet people and you try things and then those friendships don't work out, or you struggle to make those connections, then you start to erode your own self-esteem, because
Yes.
then you're not sure if what you're bringing to the table is enough. So yeah, I think those are some of the skills that you need. And then I think just maybe not a skill, but just a knowledge that you should not try to replicate the life you had back home where you land. Almost like, again, like exactly like you said, this is your life with a blank canvas, and don't try and do like a lifestyle copy paste,
Yes.
because I think that'll frustrate more than help you.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's what I would say.
Wow, these are amazing tips also that you're giving us. I really love this tour of duty, and also really knowing who you are, because I agree with you. Like in the in the past when I lived abroad, I also sometimes said yes to things just, in the hope of meeting people or of filling my weekends, for example. And then I thought, but this really isn't me. This is not making me happy. And then afterwards I would only feel like bad about it, to be honest.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, I think making friends is really difficult.
It is after 30.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's difficult, sure, but I think it also depends on like the difference in cultures as well. Because for instance, like I've found that I've made friends mostly with people who are expats as well. And I think it's like we all know what the struggle is. So we're
Yeah.
open to having, a coffee and hanging out and that kind of thing. But then I also think that depending on your cultural like orientation, some people are just more secluded and individualistic, and some people
Yes.
like to come together and just hang out and be more communal. And that's where I kind of fall on the spectrum. Um, and so, yeah, I found that that's been a challenge too. And then, of course, finding people who are at the same life stage and not just age has also been a tricky thing.
Hmm.
Because, if I went strictly with age, finding friends who maybe don't understand, the fact that I'm married with a dog, and, I'm not as available as maybe if I were completely single, but then also
Hmm.
finding people who are in that married life stage, but maybe have children. And then,
Yeah.
there's that sway as well. So, man, finding friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. I actually, my first episode of this podcast is about finding friends and building a community abroad because it's something I sometimes struggled with as well. It was really easy when I was a student and traveling around and living in London doing my master's degree. Like, you meet people right away. But I learned that as you grow a bit older and exactly the changes in lifestyle happen, some people get married and get kids, others don't. It also becomes a bit more difficult to find those friends. And I found it especially hard back home, actually, in the Netherlands, because I had my really good friends from university and high school that I still see to this day. But all my more recent friends were living abroad. So I realized at some point, okay, I need to have more friends in the Netherlands. And I don't know how it is in Norway, but I find in the Netherlands that people meet their friends also in high school and university, maybe their first job, and then they stick with them for the rest of their lives. They're not really open to meeting new people or to mingling between groups at a later stage.
Yeah.
And that makes it really difficult for expats and former expats like myself to meet
Yeah.
people, to find really good
Yeah.
friendships again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely something that I've heard here as well, that people find their friends really early on and they stick with their friends. And so then they go through the life stages all together. And so then you've got your group that you move with. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that that's going to be quite challenging. I've sort of taken a very intentional approach to it to say, like, if I'm going to make friends here, then I need to be really intentional about where I hang out. And then once I've kind of gone there and I found, okay, I like this place, I'll keep going there. And so, I found like quite a few friends actually from hanging out at the same space. And then it's also like that thing of, okay, I see you a few times here. I'm gonna slide into your DMs and be like, hey, let's catch a coffee, let's hang out, because you kind of have to. And I was thinking about it that the way that I think most of us are socialized is that kind of thing, like being intentional about finding companionship in a romantic sense, that's something that's celebrated. Like, it's
Yeah.
kind of expected that you will seek out a companion, a mate. But when it comes to friendships, I don't think there is that much that is spoken about yet about how intentional you have to be to make those friends,
Yeah.
and you have to pursue your friends. I saw a wonderful clip by Jane Fonda a few weeks ago where she was talking about how she has been so intentional about pursuing friendships and nurturing friendships. Like just the same way that you would nurture a relationship, you should be doing the same thing for friendships because
Yeah.
we need them. We desperately need friends and community to thrive
Yeah.
wherever we are. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you were saying this. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah.
That's great. So something else that I'm really curious about is you already mentioned it before, like setting up or continuing your business in Norway has been quite challenging. I know that you are still also finding clients in South Africa, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you live in a northern country and well, at least the time difference isn't there or maybe not so much. But when your business is more focused in another country, how do you make that work?
Yeah, it's well, again, this is one of those watch this space. But so far it's been good. I think I was very fortunate coming here that I had projects that I was working on. And the people who I was working with on those projects understood that I was going to move away. And so I had set it up in a way that these projects could continue to work even without me being physically present. So that was super important. And then for some other work where, I've been looking at taking on some other work, it's been, well, maybe let me group that all together for parts of projects where I need to be there in South Africa. So either blocking off that time and doing a lot of meetings and some of that in-person work and traveling there for that. Or one of the things that I've always kind of dreamt of that my business would be is more of a collective to say, like, we have an approach and a way of working around inclusion and diversity and equity issues. And so we'll bring on people with different skill sets within that space. And so then the collective would kind of be able to be wherever. And so when I think about a vision of the future for my business is, let's say the next chapters of my expat life take me to Spain and then to Italy, and then we can dream, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, my intention is that this collective would be able to do work in those countries as well. And so I would kind of have that legacy or that footprint of doing this inclusion, equity, diversity, and belonging work in those different countries. So yeah, so that's how I'll do it. But in terms of expanding the business to Norway, that's something that I've been intentional about working on. I joined a business incubator. Yeah, soon after I arrived, actually, I started in September, and that was wonderful in terms of just giving me access to network, to people here locally. And actually, one of the women who I met, she's very passionate about kind of helping internationals find their feet and develop their own businesses in Norway. And so she and I have kind of started talking about work that we've put in proposals together for. And so it's early days, but fingers crossed, it looks like there might be a way.
Great. Oh, that sounds really cool also.
Yeah,
And I like what you mentioned about the network. I think that's so important for any job, really. I learned that as a diplomat, but also as an entrepreneur, you really need to have a network. And even not for
absolutely.
your job, just as a human, you need a network.
Yeah.
And so it's good to go out to these things. And you signed up for it right away, even though you were probably like still overwhelmed with the culture shock.
Yeah.
So well done again.
Yeah.
I think that was a really good move.
Yeah, I think actually there were a few kind of bets that I made that were good bets in the bigger picture. One of them was starting to kind of slot in events that I would go to and things that I was going to attend once I'd gotten here, but I started planning for them before I left. And so one of the spaces I mentioned earlier where I found a few friends, that space, I went to it for the first time kind of 7 days after I'd arrived because, it was an event that I'd seen before I left as well. So I
Yeah.
think again, it's like that intentionality of being like,
Yeah.
cool, I'm going to be here and I just want to see what I can do. How many coffees can I have with
Yes.
people? How can I be like all over the city, getting lost, but making my way?
Yeah.
And maybe that's also something to add is one of the things that I really wanted was to have my own life
Hmm.
that was separate from my husband's life because, you know, he's here for work and we have a life together, of course. But I also wanted, for my own, again, freedom and autonomy, I wanted to have my own thing that I was doing. So it was incredibly important to me as soon as I got here to just find as many events as possible, and to go there and to sit, if it was social, if it was professional, so that I could start to get a feeling of the city for myself. And yeah, I think maybe that's another recommendation that I would add for any expat, especially if you're traveling there with someone else, is don't fall into the background. Remember that this is your experience as well as an individual, and so you should make it what you want it to be for yourself.
Yeah, good that you add that to it. When we move as a couple, I don't know it because I've never moved somewhere with a partner, but I can imagine that when you move, you have both your equal roles. And then if you move for one's job, then and the other one tags along, it's so easy to slip into that, okay, I'll just, tidy up the house while you're gone or whatever. And it changes the roles within the relationship. And I think it's so important to watch out for that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember actually even preparing for our move. I was very much like, oh, this is not my thing. I'll just support, I'm just in the background. And it was my therapist one time who said to me, like, hang on a second, are you not moving your whole body to another place too? Like, that means that you do have skin in the game. Like, this is a big deal for you as well. So
Yeah.
you should own it. And it was, I think, from that realization that I then went into it like with full force to say, okay, this is also my experience. And actually, we've gotten to a point now where we're both equally busy with stuff. if I'm doing work, then I go to a co-working space to also be at the office.
Yeah.
And then we have like our rhythms and routines. And that's been so great for me again to just retain that sense of freedom, but then also that sense of self to say, like, even if it gets a bit shaky because of the challenges, like I've mentioned already, at least I know that I'm doing stuff and I'm contributing and I'm feeling
Yeah.
productive, which is
Yeah.
so important for me personally.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Wow. To me, you are such an inspiration, really. Like the tips that
Thank
you
you.
have for upcoming expats or even expats who have lived somewhere maybe for years, I think they're super valuable. I think your experience is really super inspiring. I don't know what else to say about it, actually. It's really cool. I'm really glad that you were here on this show. I have
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Thanks for
Yeah,
inviting me.
you're very welcome. I have one final question that I ask all guests, and that is, what is your number one hack to make living or traveling abroad easier?
Schedule time to speak to friends and family back home. Schedule it, book it in. I have a Sunday morning call with my mom as I walk my dog every Sunday, and it's really important.
Yeah.
Schedule it. Yeah.
Yeah. Great hack. Again, a good tip. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And is there anywhere people can follow you if they want to hear more from you?
Oh, yes. I am on Twitter. I'm on all the places. I'm on Twitter at Tumi WC. I am on TikTok at Tumi's Thoughts. And I'm on Instagram as well. And you can find me there.
Great. I'll also add them to the show notes.
Amazing.
Okay. Thank you so much. And
Thank
thank you for this
you.
lovely talk. Okay.
Absolutely.